The sample was the color of rust, and senior diagnostician Ilan Vareth was certain it would tell him nothing he did not already know. He held the vial in the light of the diagnostic bay, turning it between two of his long, pale fingers, watching the liquid climb and slide against the glass. Sethari blood was the blue of a shallow sea, thin and quick and gentle, and it obeyed the rules that gentle things obeyed. This human blood was thick. It was dark. It moved like something reluctant to be moved, and it left a film on the walls of the vial where it had touched, as if it did not want to let go of anything it had once held. Primitive, he thought, and the thought was kind, the way a physician's thoughts were meant to be kind. The girl came from a hard place. Hard places made hungry blood. Around him, the diagnostic bay of the survey ship Vantage hummed with the low, patient sound of machines that had spent 400 years being gentle. The conquered medical fleet did not hurry. It drifted between the wounded worlds of the outer arm, the way a physician moves between beds in a long ward, unhurried because hurry frightened the sick. And the Sethari had made an art, over the slow centuries, of never frightening anyone. 12 ships hung in formation beyond the viewport, their white hulls soft with running lights, each one a hospital, each one a promise. The largest, the flagship Quiet Harbor, held 9,000 patients from 40 species in her long, bright wards. The fleet healed. That was all it did. That was all it had ever wanted to do. And this, Ilan told himself, was simply another patient, a small one. He set the vial into the analyzer's cradle and touched the panel, and the machine drew a whisper of the blood up into itself to begin the reference sweep. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. He had done it 10,000 times. He had catalogued the blood of the moth people of Syl, whose veins ran with something like perfume, and the slow, cold ichor of the deep tenants, and the layered plasmas of a dozen client species who came to the fleet to be made well. He knew fragility. He was, in a sense, a scholar of it. Every species he had ever studied was fragile in the end, because life was fragile, because to be alive was to be a candle in a great and windy dark, and the work of medicine was only ever the cupping of hands around a flame. The human, he was quite sure, would be the most fragile thing he had ever seen. He had reasons to think so. He had seen her arrive. 6 days ago, the fleet's forward picket had found the wreck. A colony transport, the Meridian's daughter, broken across a debris field at the edge of a system the charts did not bother to name. She had been drifting for a long time. The cold had gotten into her. The reactors had failed, and the recyclers had failed, and the air had gone first stale, and then poisonous, and then simply gone. And when the picket's rescue teams cut through her hull, they found 311 human beings who had not survived any of that. They found freezers that had failed and stores that had run out, and a great deal of evidence, written in the small, careful arrangements of the dead, that these people had understood exactly what was happening to them, and had spent their last strength making it easier for the ones who would go after. And in a sealed compartment near the ship's dead heart, wrapped in every scrap of insulation 300 people could strip from their own beds, they had found the girl. She was alive. That was the thing the report had said, 3 times, as if the writer could not quite make it stay believed. She was alive. The compartment had no power. The temperature in it had fallen far below the point at which Sethari tissue crystallized and shattered. The air had thinned to a whisper. She had been sealed in there, the reconstruction suggested, for something between 40 and 60 days, on rationed water and almost nothing else, in a cold that should have stopped any warm-blooded thing within hours. And when the rescue team's light fell across her face, she had opened her eyes and looked at them, and through cracked lips, had asked whether anyone else had made it. 14 years old, that was what her people's records said. 14 of her world's years, which came to a little more than 9 of the fleet's. A child, a small, half-frozen, half-starved child who had outlived 300 adults of her own kind, and then had the strength, at the end of it, to ask after the dead. Ilan had read the report and felt the thing every physician feels, the ache that is half pity and half professional hunger, and had told himself it was a very sad case and a very interesting one, and that the girl was, without question, extraordinarily lucky. Lucky, he would remember later how long he had believed in luck. The analyzer chimed. It was the wrong sound. It was not the soft, complete tone the machine made when a reference sweep finished cleanly. It was the short doubled note it made when it wanted a human being to come and look, because it had found something it did not have a category for, and the machines of the conquered fleet were very old and very sure, and did not often ask for help. Ilan leaned in and read the panel, and read it again, because the first reading did not make sense. The reference sweep had failed. Not stalled, not errored. Failed in the specific way the machine reserved for a sample that had done something to the reagent. The analyzer, to establish a baseline, introduced a suite of standardized microbes into a thin partition of the sample, harmless marker strains that every species' blood tolerated, that drifted in the plasma and let the machine measure the medium around them. The strains were meant to be inert. They were meant to sit there and be counted. They were gone, all of them. In the 90 seconds since the sweep began, the human blood had found the marker strains, everyone, and taken them apart. Ilan stood very still. He told himself there were ordinary explanations: a contaminated reagent, a calibration drift, a fluke of temperature. He was a careful physician, and careful physicians did not leap. They walked, one sure step at a time, toward the truth. He purged the cradle and drew a fresh partition and ran the sweep again, and this time he watched it through the scope, at the magnification where individual cells resolved into their small, hungry lives. He had seen immune cells before. Every species had them, the patient soldiers of the blood, and in most species they were slow and courteous things, drifting until they met something wrong and then folding themselves around it with a kind of bureaucratic care, tagging it, marking it, waiting for reinforcement, following a chain of chemical permissions as orderly as anything in the fleet's own halls. Sethari immunity was a committee. It deliberated. Ilan had always found something reassuring in that, the way the body, like the fleet, took counsel before it acted. The human blood did not take counsel. Under the scope he watched a marker strain drift into the plasma, and he watched what came for it. There were the pale cells he expected, the neutrophil forms the human records had described, and they moved with an eagerness he had never seen in living tissue. They did not wait. They did not tag and withdraw. The nearest one reached the marker microbe and simply engulfed it, folded it whole into itself and flooded it, and Ilan's instruments read the chemistry of that flooding and reported, in their calm way, a cocktail of oxidants and enzymes and metal-stripping proteins so aggressive that the machine flagged 3 of them as tissue hazard compounds, the kind of molecules the fleet stored behind seals. The human body made them on purpose. It made them in its own blood by the billion and carried them everywhere it went. And it did not stop with the one microbe. The oxidant burst had barely finished when another cell arrived, a larger form, and it did not eat the debris so much as interrogate it, breaking the dead strain into fragments and holding them up, and within minutes, other cells were arriving that had clearly been shown those fragments and had gone away and come back changed, come back specific, carrying molecules shaped to fit that exact microbe and nothing else. A swarm of tailored keys, manufactured on the spot for a lock the body had met 90 seconds ago. Ilan had written the standard fleet monograph on adaptive immunity. It was a good monograph. In it he had described the process by which a body learned a new threat and built defenses against it, and he had given, as the typical figure for a well-functioning species, a timescale of 11 to 14 days. The human blood had done it in 6 minutes. He straightened away from the scope. The bay was very quiet. Beyond the viewport the 12 white ships drifted in their soft formation, healing, patient, 400 years unhurried, and Ilan Vareth stood over a vial of a 14-year-old girl's blood and felt, for the first time in a long and gentle career, the specific cold that comes when a thing you have filed under fragile turns over in your hands and shows you its teeth. He was reasonable. He was a scientist, so he did what a scientist does with a result that frightens him. He tried to make it go away. He ran the sweep a third time and a fourth. He changed the marker strains for hardier ones, environmental extremophiles from a sealed reference library, organisms that shrugged off acid and cold and radiation, that no client species blood had ever fully cleared. The human blood cleared them in under an hour, and where it could not immediately kill a thing, it walled it, threw down a lattice of clotting proteins, and trapped it in a cage of the body's own making and starved it there, patient as a siege. He introduced a compound designed to suppress immune response, a standard fleet sedative for the blood, the drug they gave to overactive patients to calm a storming defense. The human blood metabolized it, took the sedative apart for parts, and went on killing. By the fourth hour, Ilan had stopped telling himself about contaminated reagents. He sat down. He was aware that his hands were not quite steady, and he was ashamed of it, because he was old and he was senior and the young technician across the bay, a bright, anxious Sethari named Sesh who had been pretending not to watch him for the last hour, deserved a mentor whose hands were steady. But there was a picture forming in Ilan's mind, and he could not make it stop forming, and the picture was this: 311 human beings, sealed in a dying ship, in the cold and the dark and the thinning air, and every one of them carrying in their veins a defense like the one under his scope, a private army that manufactured tissue-hazard poisons and learned a new enemy in the time it took to boil water. 311 of them had died anyway, and one had lived. He thought about what it would take to kill something with blood like this. He thought about the cold that should have shattered her, the airlessness that should have smothered her, the starvation that should have hollowed her out and stopped her small heart, and he thought about the report that had said, 3 times, as if the writer could not make it stay believed, "She is alive." And for the first time Ilan understood that the report had not been marveling at luck. The report had been afraid. Senior, Sesh had come to stand a careful distance away, hands folded in the anxious, not the young maid when they had bad news and no rank to carry it. The prime physician's office is asking for the reference profile, for the intake file. They want to clear the child for the general ward. The general ward. 9,000 patients from 40 species, breathing the same recycled air, sharing the same gentle rooms. Ilan thought of the girl walking through it. He thought of every microbe on that ship, 400 years of accumulated client organisms, drifting past a body that took strangers apart in 6 minutes and remembered them forever. And he did not yet know whether the picture in his mind was one of horror or of the most extraordinary hope he had ever been handed, and the not knowing was its own kind of vertigo. "Tell the prime physician's office," Ilan said slowly, "that the reference profile is not ready. Senior, the intake protocol requires." "Tell them," he said, and his voice was gentler than he felt, because gentleness was 400 years deep in him and did not leave even now, "that I need to meet the patient." He looked back at the vial in the cradle. In the hours since he had drawn it, the blood had continued its slow, patient work along the glass, and where it had touched, the standardized microbial film that coated every clinical surface in the fleet, the harmless background life that lived on everything, had been scoured clean. A bright, empty streak where the human blood had rested. It had killed the world simply by being set down in it. Fragile, he had thought, an hour and a lifetime ago. Hard places made hungry blood. He had had no idea. None of them had. And down in the recovery ward, wrapped now in warmth she had gone 60 days without, a 14-year-old girl who had outlived everyone she loved was sleeping the deep sleep of the finally safe, and had no notion at all that she had begun, simply by surviving, to terrify a fleet of 400 years. Ren Callas woke because the room was warm, and warmth had become the strangest thing she knew. For a long moment she did not open her eyes. She had learned, in the sealed compartment, not to open her eyes until she had taken stock, because opening your eyes cost energy and energy was the only currency left, and she had spent 60 days learning to hoard it. So she lay still and counted, her heartbeat slow and even, her breath easy, no ache in it, no crackle. Her fingers all 10, and they moved when she asked them to, which had not always been true near the end, when the cold had gotten so far into her hands that they had stopped belonging to her. The mattress under her was soft. That was wrong. The last mattress had been the floor of the compartment and the frost-stiff bedding of 300 people who had not needed bedding anymore. She had lain on all of it, layer on layer, a nest built out of everything the dead had given her, because her mother had said in the last clear hour her mother had, "Your small small things keep heat if you wrap them right. You wrap yourself and you wait, and you do not open the door no matter what you hear. Promise me you do not open the door." She had promised. She had kept the promise. She had heard a great many things through that door in the dark, and she had not opened it, and she understood now, awake in a warm room because someone else had opened it finally from the other side. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was pale and curved and lit with a light that had no source she could find, a soft, even glow like an overcast morning. The room was round. Everything in it was round, the walls flowing into the floor without corners, and it took her a moment to understand that this was on purpose, that whoever built this place had decided corners were unkind. There were machines, but they were quiet and they were far away at the edges, drawn back as if to give her space. And there was a smell she could not place, clean and faintly green, like crushed leaves, like a garden she had read about but never seen because she had been born on a ship, and her whole life had been metal and recycled air, and the promise of a world at the end of it that the Meridian's daughter had never reached. She was not on the Meridian's daughter. She knew that the way you know a thing in your body before your mind agrees to it. The air was different. The gravity was a little lighter, and she was warm, warm all the way through, warm in the deep places the cold had owned, and she lay in the warmth and did the thing she had not let herself do in 60 days, which was to feel it, all of it, the whole crushing weight of being the one who was left. She did not cry for long. She had learned that too. Crying cost water. When she sat up, the machines at the edges of the room stirred, and a section of the wall thinned and became a doorway, and a creature came through it. Wren had seen pictures of aliens. Every colony child had. The great catalog of known neighbors was the first thing they taught you, because the founders had believed that a child who knew the shape of a stranger would not fear the stranger, and the catalog had been full of gentle drawings of the peoples of the arm. But a drawing was a flat thing, and this was not flat. It was tall, taller than any person she had known, and thin in a way that should have looked frail but did not, because it moved with an enormous care, folding its long limbs as it came, lowering itself so that its head was below hers, and she understood after a moment that it was making itself small for her the way she had been told once, that you make yourself small and quiet for a frightened animal. Its skin was the pale gray blue of a winter sky. Its eyes were large and dark and wet-looking, and there were 4 of them, arranged in a soft arc, and all 4 were fixed on her with an attention so complete it was almost unbearable. "You are awake," it said. Its voice came from somewhere in its long throat, and a small device at its collar turned the sounds into words she knew, half a beat behind, so that it seemed to speak twice, once in music and once in meaning. I am glad you are awake. Do you have pain?" "No," Wren said. Her voice came out a cracked whisper, and she was ashamed of it and then decided not to be. "No pain. Where am I? Who are you?" "You are aboard the survey ship Vantage of the conquered medical fleet. You are safe. You have been safe for 6 days. It lowered itself further until it was nearly kneeling, its 4 eyes level with hers. "My name is Vareth. I am a physician. I have come to know you if you will allow it." "To know you. Not to examine you, not to treat you. To know you." Ren looked at the strange kneeling giant with its winter skin, and its 4 wet eyes making themselves small in a round and cornerless room, and something in her, some clenched thing that had been clenched for 60 days, loosened by a single notch. "Ren," she said, "my name's Ren Callas. Did anybody else?" She stopped. She made herself finish it because she had promised herself in the dark that if anyone ever asked, she would say the whole of it and not hide from it. Was there anybody else? On the ship? Alive? The physician was quiet for a moment. When it answered, it did not look away, and she was grateful for that, because everyone she had ever known who lied had looked away first. "No," Ilan said. "You were the only one. I am sorry, Ren. I am more sorry than I have words your device will carry." She nodded. She had known. She had known since the compartment, since the last of the sounds beyond the door had stopped, but knowing a thing and hearing it were different weights, and she let the second weight settle onto the first, and she did not open the door on the crying, not here, not in front of the kind giant. Later, when she had water to spare. "Thank you for telling me straight," she said. Ilan Vareth made a sound she did not understand, a soft folding note, and the translator did not translate it, and only much later would she learn that it was the sound his people made in the presence of a courage they had not expected and did not know where to put. She did not know, sitting there in the warm round room, that 100 meters away a team of the fleet's finest had spent the night arguing about her. She did not know that her blood had scoured a clinical surface clean of life, or that a sedative meant to calm a raging body had been eaten alive by her own defenses, or that the words tissue hazard and unprecedented, and from one frightened junior voice, weapon, had been spoken over her sleeping form. She knew only that she was warm, and that a stranger had knelt to be small for her, and had told her the truth, and she decided, in the simple economical way she decided things now, that she would trust him until he gave her a reason not to. It would be a long time before he gave her a reason, and it would not be the reason she feared. Ilan rose, unfolding to his full pale height, and Ren watched him and thought that he seemed suddenly troubled, though she could not read the faces of his people yet and would not swear to it. He was looking at her hands, both of them folded in her lap, and at the backs of her hands where, 6 days ago, the cold had taken her fingers and turned them the gray-black of dead things. They were not gray-black anymore. Ren looked down at her own hands and saw what he saw. She remembered them near the end, the fingertips hard and dark, 2 of them split at the nail, a wound on the left palm from where she had cut it on the frost-brittle edge of a locker and had not even felt it. She remembered a physician on the ship in the first days, before the physician died, saying the words she would lose the fingers, that when they got somewhere warm the fingers would have to come off because dead flesh did not come back. They had come back. The dark was gone. The split nails had grown out clean. The cut on her palm was a thin silver line, old-looking, healed the way a wound heals over months, and it had been 6 days. "Ren," Ilan said, and his voice had changed, gone careful in a new way. "May I ask you a question about your hands?" "They were frostbit," Ren said. "Real bad. The doctor said I'd lose the fingers." She flexed them all 10, watching them obey. "I guess your medicine's better." "Yes," Ilan said. But he said it slowly, and he did not look like a man taking a compliment. He looked like a man doing arithmetic he did not like the answer to. Because the fleet's medicine was very good, and it had done a great deal for her in 6 days, but it had not regrown the dead flesh of her fingers. It could not have. That was not a thing medicine did for any species he had ever treated. It had cleaned the wounds and warmed her and kept the tissue from dying further. And then it had, as physicians do, stepped back and waited to see how much would have to be cut away. Nothing would have to be cut away. In 6 days the girl's body had looked at flesh that every rule Ilan knew said was dead and unrecoverable, and had simply decided otherwise, had flooded the dead fingers with new vessels and cleared the ruined tissue and built it back, and she had slept through it as though it were nothing, as though bodies did this, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world for a thing to be that far gone and come back whole. For her, he was beginning to understand. It was ordinary. That was the part that put the cold in him, not that her body could do the impossible. That her body did the impossible casually, without fanfare as its baseline, and that she sat there flexing her resurrected fingers and thanked him for medicine that had done almost none of it. "Your medicine is not better," Ilan said, and he surprised himself by saying it because it was more truth than a physician usually gave a patient. "Ren, I want to be honest with you because you were honest with me. The medicine helped a little, but your hands healed themselves. Do you understand? Your own body did that. I have treated the peoples of 40 worlds, and I have never seen a body do that." Ren looked at her hands, and then at him, and she did the thing that would stay with Ilan Vareth for the rest of his long life, the thing he would describe later to the frightened officers and the arguing physicians and eventually to the assembled council of the entire fleet, when they demanded to know what the human was, what she wanted, what she was capable of. She shrugged. "We heal okay," she said. "Grandpa always said we were hard to kill. He said it like it was a joke, but he wasn't really joking." She turned her hands over, examining the thin silver line on her palm without much interest. "There was a boy on our ship broke his leg in 2 places falling off the number 3 gantry. Compound, you could see the bone. 6 weeks he was running again. Everybody said he was lucky." She looked up at Ilan with her dark human eyes, and there was something in them, some flat old knowledge that did not belong in a face that young. "We say that a lot, lucky. I don't think we know what the word means, really. I think we just say it because the other thing's too scary." "What is the other thing?" Ilan asked. He had not meant to ask, it came out of him. Ren thought about it. 60 days in the dark had made her someone who thought about things before she said them. "That nothing was going to save us," she said quietly. "So we had to be the kind of thing that doesn't need saving. My mom said that, right at the end. She said we didn't get a soft world, so we grew up hard." She said it like it was a good thing. Ren's jaw tightened just slightly, the only crack she let show. "I used to think she was just trying to make me feel better, but I'm the one still here, so maybe she was right." Ilan Vareth stood in the round, warm room and looked at a 14-year-old girl who had outlived 300 adults, whose blood took strangers apart in 6 minutes and whose hands raised themselves from the dead, and who explained all of it with a single word her people used. He now understood the way his people used prayer. Lucky. A word to say instead of the true word. And the true word he was beginning to see was not a word at all. It was a fact, and the fact was this: that somewhere far back in the dark of a world the fleet had never seen, human beings had been made, not gently, not carefully, not by 400 patient years of cupping hands around a flame, but by something that had spent a very long time trying to kill them and had, catastrophically, failed. He needed to see the whole of it. He needed to understand exactly what she was, not for the officers who wanted to call her a weapon, and not for the physicians who wanted to call her a cure, but for himself, because he was a scholar of fragility, and he had just met the first thing in 400 years that was not fragile, and the not knowing was a fire in him now. "Ren," he said gently, "I would like to run some tests, on your blood mostly. It will not hurt, a small needle no more. Will you let me?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she held out her arm, palm up, the silver-scarred palm, the resurrected fingers, and she said the thing that would echo in him for a long time after, because she said it not as a patient granting a favor, but as a survivor stating a law of the world she had learned in the dark and the cold and the airless quiet. "Take whatever you need," Ren Callis said. "It grows back." They gave Ilan Vareth a laboratory of his own, and a mandate, and a fear he could feel spreading through the fleet like a change in the pressure of the air. The laboratory was on the Vantage's lower deck, a sealed suite behind 3 sets of doors, and the fleet's prime physician had signed the order for it after seeing the surface Ilan had brought her. The clinical panel scoured clean in a single bright streak where the girl's blood had rested. The prime physician was named Othmala, and she was older even than Ilan, older than almost anyone in the fleet, so old that her sky-blue skin had faded to the gray of a clouded moon, and she had spent 300 years being the calmest person in every room she entered. She was not calm now. She had held the scoured panel up to the light with 2 trembling fingers, and she had said, in the softest voice Ilan had ever heard her use, "What have we brought aboard, Ilan?" "A child," he had said. "Only a child. A child whose blood kills our reference library." Mala had set the panel down very carefully, as if it might still be dangerous, which it was. "The officers are already using a word. Do you know the word?" "Weapon," Ilan said. "Sesh told me." "Weapon." Mala folded her long hands. "And the physicians are using a different word, and it is a more dangerous word because it is a hopeful one, and hope makes people careless. Do you know that word?" "Cure." "Cure." The prime physician had looked at him with her faded eyes. "We are a healing fleet, Ilan. For 400 years we have gone to the wounded worlds, and we have asked for nothing, and we have healed what we could, and buried what we could not, and we have been welcome everywhere because we frighten no one. And now a small warm creature has fallen into our hands whose body is a factory of poisons and a forge of miracles, and every officer in this fleet wants to know if she is a weapon, and every physician wants to know if she is a cure, and not one of them, not one, has asked the only question that matters." She had leaned close. "The only question that matters, Ilan, is what she is. Go and find out, and be careful. Be careful in a way we have forgotten how to be, because I do not think this fleet has met the like of her in all its years, and I do not think we are ready." So Ilan went and found out, and what he found out over the days that followed was worse and more wonderful than anything Mala had feared. He began with the fever. He had noticed it in the intake data and had not believed it, the way he had not believed the first failed sweep. Human core temperature ran hot. That was known. That was in the thin old catalog entries. Humans burned warm because they lived warm. A furnace metabolism from a world that swung between seasons. But the intake trace showed something the catalog had not. That when Ren's body detected an invader, it did not simply raise her temperature by the courteous fraction most species managed. It drove the heat up, hard and fast and on purpose, into a range that Ilan's instruments flagged in red. A range that would denature Sethari proteins and cook Sethari tissue, and kill any physician in his fleet within the hour. She did it to herself. That was the thing he could not stop turning over. The human body, faced with an infection, made a deliberate decision to become an oven, to burn hot enough to kill the invader and gamble that its own tissues, its own proteins, its own delicate machinery, could take the heat the invader could not. It was a strategy of appalling confidence. It was a body that had decided it could outsuffer anything that tried to live inside it. And Ilan ran the numbers on the survival margin. The razor's edge between a fever that killed the disease and a fever that killed the host, and found that the human body walked that edge as a matter of routine, threw itself onto that edge the way it did everything, casually, as baseline, and lived. He asked her about it. He had gotten into the habit of asking her about it, because the instruments told him what her body did, and only Ren could tell him what it felt like. Fevers? She was sitting cross-legged on the examination couch, eating, which she did with a focus that unsettled the Sethari staff, who took small polite meals and could not understand the sheer caloric hunger of her, the way she burned through food, the way her body demanded fuel like an engine. "Yeah, I ran hot a lot as a kid. You just ride it out. It's like," she searched for it, "it's like your body decides it's gonna win, and it just cranks everything up and burns the sickness out, and you feel like garbage for a day and then it's over. My mom used to sit with me. She'd say, 'Let it burn, baby, let it burn, your body knows what it's doing.'" She took another bite. "I always thought everybody's body did that." "No," Ilan said quietly. "No body I have ever studied does that. Ren, the temperatures your body reaches would kill me. They would kill everyone on this ship. Your body deliberately becomes a thing that we could not survive being in order to save itself, and then it comes back down as if nothing happened. Ren considered this. So I'm like a walking oven you can't turn off. In a sense. Huh? She seemed to find this more interesting than alarming. That was another thing about her that unsettled the staff. She was not afraid of what her own body could do. She had lived inside it 14 years and it had never once betrayed her, had in fact done nothing but keep her alive through things that killed everyone around her. And so she trusted it the way Ilan's people trusted the fleet completely, without examining the trust. That why the cold didn't get me, in the compartment. And there Ilan had to stop, because the cold was the other half of it, and the two halves together made a picture that no physiology he knew could hold. She could burn hotter than anything he had met, and she could also, he had learned, go cold, could let her body drop into a slowed, banked state, heart rate falling, extremities sacrificed to protect the core, metabolism throttled down to a cold glow, riding out cold and hunger on almost nothing for weeks. Most warm-blooded species could do one or the other. A furnace metabolism ran hot and died fast when the fuel stopped. A banked metabolism ran cold and slow and could not generate the heat to fight infection. Ren's body did both. It could be the oven and it could be the coal. It could burn a disease alive and it could survive 60 days in a freezer. And it chose between these strategies the way a soldier chooses a weapon, fluidly, as the situation demanded. And it had chosen right every single time, or she would not be sitting on his couch eating with both her resurrected hands. Yes, Ilan said, that is why the cold did not get you. He ran the deeper tests then, the ones that took days, and each one was a door that opened onto a room larger than the last. He tested her blood against poisons. Not to hurt her. He took the samples, worked them in isolation, kept the girl herself far from harm. But he took her blood and he introduced to it the toxins the fleet kept behind seals, the venoms and the heavy metals and the cellular poisons that killed across species lines, and he watched her blood meet them. Some it simply endured, buffered, carried without complaint at concentrations that would have stopped his heart. Others it took apart, her liver's chemistry reconstructed in the sample vial, enzymes he could not name breaking poison down into things the body could use or throw away. And a few, the ones it could not break and could not buffer, it survived by a strategy so audacious that Ilan laughed out loud when he understood it, a short, shocked bark of a laugh that made Sesh drop a tray. It changed. Exposed to a poison it could not handle, the human blood turned certain genes on and certain genes off, in living cells in hours, and produced a slightly different body, one better suited to the poison. And if he gave that changed blood a little time, it would meet the same poison a second time and shrug. Adaptation. Not across generations, the slow, patient adaptation of evolution that his own species revered and had all but stopped doing. Adaptation within a single life, within a single day. A body that rewrote its own instructions on the fly to survive whatever the world threw at it, and threw at it, and threw at it. He thought of the wrecked colony ship, the failed reactors, the poisoning air, and he understood that these people had come from a lineage that had spent 100,000 years being thrown at by a world that wanted them dead, and had answered not by dying and not by fleeing but by becoming, over and over, exactly the thing that could not be killed by whatever had last tried. Hard to kill, the grandfather's joke that was not a joke. Ilan wrote it in his notes in the formal script of the fleet, and then he wrote beneath it, in the same careful hand, a sentence that would be quoted at the council and would spread through the fleet and would change in the end, how 12 white ships thought about the small, warm creature in their care. They are not hard to kill, he wrote. They are a thing that killing has already been tried on, comprehensively, for a very long time, and did not work. The fear in the fleet grew. He felt it at every meal, in the 2 quiet corridors, in the way the officers had begun to post a guard outside the girls' suite, not to keep others out. Ilan understood, but to keep something in, as if a 14-year-old eating her third breakfast were a breach that might spread. An officer named Vane Corral of the fleet's small security branch requested a meeting and put to Ilan, in the flat, courteous voice of someone who had already decided, the case for what he called containment protocols. The human blood was a hazard. The human immune response destroyed reference organisms. If the girl were introduced to the general population, or if her blood were ever released into the fleet's closed ecology, the consequences were unknown, and unknown in a fleet of 9,000 patients meant unacceptable. "You want to keep her sealed away," Ilan said. "I want to keep 9,000 people alive," Corral said. "She is a child diagnostician. I take no pleasure in it." "But you have told the council yourself that her body manufactures compounds we classify as tissue hazards. You have told us it destroys everything it meets. What is that, if not a weapon that happens to be shaped like a girl?" And Ilan had no answer that would satisfy him, because Corral was not wrong about the facts. He was only wrong about the girl. He had never knelt in a round, warm room and been made small for. He had never watched her hold out her scarred arm and say, "Take whatever you need, it grows back." He had never heard her ask, before she asked anything about herself, whether anyone else had made it. Corral knew what her blood could do. He did not know what she was, and Ilan was beginning to suspect that these were, in the end, the same knowledge, and that the fleet was about to learn it in the hardest way there was. Because there was one more thing in the girl's blood that Ilan had not yet told anyone. He had found it late on the fourth night, alone in the sealed suite with the instruments humming and the girl asleep 2 decks up. He had been studying the way her adaptive cells remembered, the tailored keys they built for each new enemy, the way they kept a library of every threat the body had ever met, and he had run, out of a thoroughness that was half dread, her blood against a sample from the fleet's own quarantine vault. The vault held the worst things the fleet had ever encountered, sealed and studied and never cured. The plagues that had beaten 400 years of Sethari medicine. Among them was one they simply called the silt, a thing that was barely alive, a self-copying rot that got into the marrow and turned the blood to gray water, that had killed every species it touched, and that the fleet kept sealed in the deepest vault because it had no answer to it and had made its peace with having none. He had given Wren's blood the silt, in isolation, behind seals, expecting for once to see the human defense meet a thing it could not beat. He had been right that he would see something he had never seen. He had been wrong about what it would be. And in the morning he sat before the results with his 4 eyes fixed and unblinking, and he did not call the prime physician, and he did not call Corral, because he understood with a cold certainty that he had just found the answer to the only question that mattered, and that the fleet was not ready to hear it. What Ilan had found in the sealed suite on the 4th night was this: the human blood had beaten the silt. Not endured it, not walled it away, beaten it. He had watched the rot get into the sample and begin its patient work, the same work it had done to 40 species, dissolving the machinery of the cells it touched, turning bright blood to gray water. And he had watched the human defense meet it and lose at first, the oxidant burst failing, the tailored keys failing, the walls of clotting protein dissolving as fast as the body built them. And for an hour Ilan had thought with a strange grief, so there is a thing that beats even her. And then the human blood had done what it did to the poison it could not break. It had changed. Under the scope he had watched cells turn genes on and off, watched the body abandon strategies that failed and reach for stranger ones, watched it try and die and try and die, and somewhere in the small hours, try something that worked. A molecule he could not name, folded to fit the silt's copying mechanism and jam it. And once one cell had found the answer, the library did what the library did. It learned it, it copied it, it taught it. And by morning the sample that should have been gray water was bright and clean, and full of a defense that had not existed the day before, purpose-built, in a single night, against a plague that had beaten 400 years of the finest medicine in the arm. The human body had solved, in one night and by accident, the problem the conquered fleet had sealed in its deepest vault and given up on. Ilan understood, sitting before that result, exactly what he was holding. In the girl's blood, or in the process her blood could be coaxed to perform, was the cure for the silt, and he suspected, for a great many other sealed and hopeless things. It was the most important medical discovery in the history of his people. And it was also in the wrong hands, a demonstration that terrified him more than the officer's word weapon ever could, because a body that could out-adapt any plague was a body that could not, in the end, be defended against. And Ilan sat alone with that knowledge and understood why he had not called anyone. He was afraid of what the fleet would do with it. He was afraid of what Corral would do with it. He was afraid, most of all, that somewhere between the vault and the council chamber the small warm creature who had asked after the dead would stop being a patient and become a resource, and that his gentle 400-year fleet, which had never frightened anyone, would do the one thing it had never done, and would do it to a child. He was still deciding what to do when the alarm sounded. It was not an alarm Ilan had ever heard. The fleet had gentle alarms for gentle emergencies, soft rising tones that summoned help without spreading panic. This was not gentle. This was the deep, flat, repeating note the fleet had built 400 years ago and had never once had cause to use. The note that meant the closed ecology had been breached, that something was loose in the shared air. And Ilan was on his feet before he knew he had risen, because he understood in the marrow of him what had happened even before the prime physician's voice came over the fleet channel, tight and old and afraid. The quarantine vault on the Vantage had failed. Later they would reconstruct how. A seal fatigued past its rated life, a maintenance cycle deferred one too many times by a fleet grown certain that its deepest vault would never need opening. It did not matter how. What mattered was that the silt was loose, not in a sample, not behind seals, but in the recycled air of the survey ship Vantage, drifting through the vents into the wards where the fragile peoples of 40 worlds lay healing, and the silt did not care that they were healing. It got into the marrow and it turned the blood to gray water, and it had beaten every medicine the fleet had, and now it was aboard. The first death came within the hour. A Sethari technician, young, who had been near the vault. By the end of the shift there were 9, and the projections the fleet's own machines produced in their calm and terrible way described a curve that did not bend. The silt spread through shared air. The fleet shared air, ship to ship, in the great circulation that made 12 hulls one body. There was no seal that would hold it, because they had already learned that their seals failed. And there was no cure, because they had sealed this thing away precisely because there was no cure, and the fleet that had spent 400 years being the answer to other worlds' plagues sat in its soft white formation and watched a plague of its own begin to eat it alive. Ilan ran the whole way to the isolation suite where they had moved Ren when the alarm sounded, and he found her standing at the round viewport, watching the running lights of the flagship. And she turned when he came in and she looked at his face and she knew. She was 14 and she had spent 60 days learning to read the faces of the doomed, and she read his in an instant. "How bad?" she said, not a question. "A survivor's request for the real number." "Bad," Ilan said. "There is a disease. It was in our vault sealed. It got out, it kills my people, it kills everyone, and we have never found an answer to it." He was breathing hard, and not only from the running. "Ren, I have to tell you something, and I have to tell you the whole of it because you told me the truth in this room and I will not give you less. 4 nights ago I tested your blood against this disease, in a sample, sealed, safe, nowhere near you, and your blood beat it. Your body found an answer to the thing that is about to kill 9,000 people, in one night, by itself. Ren was very still, so you can make the medicine from my blood." No, the word cost him, not in time. "The thing your blood did, it is not a molecule I can copy in a vial and hand out. I have tried these 4 nights in secret, and the answer your blood found does not survive being taken out of your blood. It is not a substance. It is a process. It is your whole living body doing what it does, 100 systems talking to each other in a language I cannot transcribe. The cure is not in your blood, Ren. The cure is you. It is the thing your body does when the disease is inside it, and it decides to win. He watched her understand it. He watched her understand it the way she understood everything now, all at once, without flinching, the terrible arithmetic laid bare. If the cure was the process, and the process only happened when the disease was in a living human body, then there was only one living human body in the fleet, in the arm, perhaps in the reach of any chart, and it was 14 years old, and it was standing at the viewport in a borrowed gown, watching the lights of a dying fleet. You need to give it to me, Ren said. The disease on purpose, so my body can figure it out. And then, her jaw did the thing it did, the single crack she allowed. And then you take my blood while it's fighting, and that's your medicine. Yes, Ilan's 4 eyes were fixed on her. That is the shape of it. And Ren, I will not lie to you, and I will not do this to you without your knowing. I do not know if you can survive it. This is not frostbite. This is not the cold. This is a thing that has killed everything it has ever touched, and to beat it your body will have to do what it did to the sample, which means it will fail and fail and fail and burn. And I have run the numbers on the fever your body would need to buy the time to find the answer, and the fever is in the range that would kill you. You would be walking an edge I cannot measure. You might find the answer. You might burn out before you do. I am a physician, and I have spent my whole life refusing to do harm, and I am standing here asking a child to let me infect her with the worst thing my people have ever sealed away, on the chance that she is strong enough to outsuffer it. I am ashamed to be asking. But 9,000 people will die, and you are the only door, and I will not walk through it for you. You have to choose. The isolation suite was very quiet. Beyond the viewport, the 12 white ships drifted, and somewhere in them people were dying 9 at a time and then more. And Ren Callas, 14 years old, the last human being anyone knew of, stood and looked at the lights and thought about it, because 60 days in the dark had made her someone who thought about things before she said them. She was thinking about the compartment. Ilan would learn this later when she told him, in the long quiet after. She was thinking about her mother's voice in the last clear hour, small things keep heat if you wrap them right, and about the promise, do not open the door no matter what you hear. She had kept that promise. She had sat in the dark and the cold, and she had not opened the door, and 300 people had died on the other side of it, and she had lived, and she had spent every day since asking herself the question that no one who survives can stop asking, which is why me? Why did I get to live? What is it for? She had not had an answer. She had begun to think there was no answer, that she had simply been the smallest and the body that kept heat best, that survival was a lottery and she had drawn the ticket and it meant nothing. And now here was a fleet full of the dying, and a kind giant asking her to walk into a fire, and Ren Callas understood, standing at the viewport, that she had been handed the answer to the question. She knew what it was for. That was worth more to her in that moment than the fear was worth, and the fear was very large. My mom used to say we didn't get a soft world, so we grew up hard, Ren said. She turned from the viewport and she looked up at Ilan Vareth, and her dark human eyes had the flat old knowledge in them again, but there was something else now, something lit. She said it like it was a good thing. I never believed her. I thought it was just something you say so the dark doesn't win. She held out her arm, palm up, the silver-scarred palm, the resurrected fingers, the same gesture she had made on the first day, the gesture that had become, without either of them naming it, the shape of everything she was. Give it to me, Ren said. Let it burn. My body knows what it's doing. Ilan Vareth did not move for a long moment. He was 400 years of gentleness, and he was being asked to do the least gentle thing of his life. And he stood there while the alarm's flat note repeated through the hull and the fleet died around him. And then he did the thing the girl had taught him to do in a round, warm room on the first day. He knelt. He made himself small for her, folded his long pale limbs and brought his head below hers, and he took her offered hand in both of his, and he held it, and he said the only thing there was to say. "Then let it burn," said the physician, "and I will not leave this room, Ren Callas, whatever happens. I will be here for all of it. You will not be in the dark alone, not this time." They gave her the silt at the 14th hour of the outbreak, and by then the fleet had lost 61 souls, and the curve the machines drew still did not bend. Ilan did it himself. He would not let Sesh do it, or any of them. He had asked the child to walk into the fire and he would be the one to light it, and so it was his own long pale hands that drew the gray sample from its sealed vial and introduced it to Ren's blood through the fine line in her arm, and it was his own 4 eyes that watched her face while he did it. She did not look away. She watched the line, and then she watched him, and when it was done she said, "How long before I feel it?" And he said, "I don't know," and she nodded, because she had learned to prefer "I don't know" to a comfortable lie, and she lay back on the couch in the sealed suite and waited for the worst thing his people had ever made to begin taking her apart. It began within the hour. Ilan had thought he was prepared for it. He had run the numbers. He had read the accounts of the 61. He had catalogued fragility his whole life and thought there was no shape of suffering he had not seen. He was wrong. He had never watched a body decide to win, and the deciding was a terrible thing to be near. The fever came first, and it came the way she had described it, hard and fast and on purpose, her body throwing itself onto the killing edge without hesitation. And Ilan watched his instruments climb into the red, and past the red into numbers he had only ever seen in the context of tissue being deliberately destroyed. Her skin went hot enough that the sweet sensors flagged her as a thermal hazard. She began to shake, great racking shudders, and then the shaking stopped and was worse, and she burned, and the silt burned in her, and the two of them fought a war in the small body on the couch that no instrument Ilan owned could fully read, because it was being fought in a language his people did not speak. She did not go quietly into it. That was the thing he had not expected and would never forget. He had imagined in his gentle way that she would slip into fever the way his own people slipped into their final sleep, softly, released. She did not. She fought it awake for as long as she could, gripping the edge of the couch with her resurrected fingers, talking, because talking was a thing she could still choose to do, and she had learned in the dark to hold on to the things she could still choose. "Tell me about your world," she said in the second hour, her voice thick. "The one your people came from, was it soft?" "It was soft," Ilan said. He had knelt by the couch and he had not risen. He had promised he would not leave, and he was keeping the promise the only way he knew, close, small, present. Warm seas, long days, nothing that hunted us. We had 100,000 years of peace, Ren, and we filled them with medicine and music and the slow, careful study of everything. And we never once had to learn to be hard, because nothing ever tried to make us." "That sounds nice," Ren whispered. Her eyes were closed now. "That sounds real nice." And then, after a long time, in a voice that was mostly gone, "Nobody should have to be hard. It's not a good thing. My mom was wrong. You shouldn't have to grow up hard." Her hand found his, gripped it. "But if you do, if the world makes you, then you might as well be good at it. Right? You might as well win." "Yes," Ilan said. His voice was not steady. He had stopped caring whether it was steady. "You might as well win." Then the fever took her all the way, and she stopped talking, and the long dark hours began. Outside the sealed suite, the fleet came apart at the seams of itself. Corral arrived at the 14th hour with an order and an escort, and the order was to cease the procedure, because introducing live plague into the one body that had beaten it was, in his flat and reasonable voice, a catastrophic escalation of an already uncontained hazard. If the girl died, they lost the only sample. If the girl's changed blood escaped, they had made the silt worse. He was not wrong about the risks. He was never wrong about the risks. He stood at the door of the sealed suite with the authority of the fleet's security branch behind him, and he demanded that Ilan stop. And Ilan rose from the couch where the child burned and put his own body between Corral and the door, and said the only thing he had left to say. "She chose this," Ilan said. "She is 14 years old and she chose this, with the whole truth in front of her, to save people who have been afraid of her since the day we pulled her out of the ice. You want to stop it to protect the fleet. I am telling you that the fleet does not deserve to be protected by anyone but her, and I am telling you that if you come through this door, Vane Corral, you will have to move me first, and I have been gentle my whole life, and I find I have run out of it. Go and count your dead. She is doing something about it, are you?" And Corral, who was not a cruel person, only a frightened one, looked past Ilan to the couch where the small human body shook and burned in its war, and he saw a thing he had not let himself see before, which was that the weapon he had feared was a child, and that the child was on fire so that his people would not have to be, and something went out of him, and he lowered his hand, and he stepped back from the door. "The prime physician is asking for you every hour," he said, quietly, a different man. "What do I tell her?" "Tell her," Ilan said, "that the human is doing what humans do. Tell her to prepare the harvest lines and the distribution for every ship, because when this child wins, we will have one chance to take the answer from her blood and put it into 9,000 people before the answer changes again. Tell her to be ready. And tell her," his voice caught, "tell her that a child is buying us all our lives, and that we will spend the rest of ours deserving it." The ordeal lasted 3 days. No physiology Ilan knew could hold 3 days. The 61 had died in hours. Every species he had ever studied, faced with the silt, had failed within a single day, because the body could not sustain the war, could not feed the fever, could not endure its own defense long enough to find an answer that did not exist. Ren's body sustained it for 3 days. It burned and banked and burned again. When the fever threatened to cross the final line, the line past which even she could not come back, her body pulled it down, throttled itself to the coal glow, bought an hour of survival. And then, when the silt surged in the reprieve, drove the heat back up into the red to fight it. Ilan watched it happen, over and over, and he understood that he was watching the 2 human strategies he had marveled at, the oven and the coal, deployed not one at a time but together, braided, a body playing its own life like an instrument at the very edge of what a life could be, and doing it not once but for 3 days, without waking, without rest, without any conscious mind to steer it, because the steering was older than mind. Was written 100,000 years deep in a lineage that a world had spent all that time trying and failing to kill. Twice he thought she was gone. Twice her heart faltered, stuttered, and the instruments cried out, and Ilan's hands hovered over interventions he was not sure would help or harm. And twice, before he could choose, the small body chose for itself, found its own rhythm again, dragged itself back from the edge by a strength that was not in any catalog, and burned on. He did not sleep. He had promised he would not leave, and he did not leave, not to eat, not to rest. Sesh brought him what he needed, and he took none of it, and he knelt by the couch through the long dark of the ordeal, and he talked to her even when she could not hear, told her about the warm seas and the long days and the music, told her she was winning, told her over and over the thing she had taught him to say. Let it burn. Your body knows what it's doing, until the words stopped being medicine for her and became a prayer for him. On the 3rd day, in the hour before the fleet's dim cycle, the fever broke. It did not break the way a fever breaks in a story, all at once, into cool relief. It broke the way a siege breaks, slowly, ground given back an inch at a time. Ilan, half blind with exhaustion, watching the scope through which he had streamed a thread of her blood for 3 days, saw a cell do the thing. He saw it try something new. A molecule folded to fit the silt's copying machinery, the same shape he had seen in the sealed sample on the 4th night. The answer, found again, found live, found in the one place the answer could actually save anyone, and he saw it work. He saw the silt's relentless copying stutter and jam. He saw the cell that had found the answer flagged and lifted and read by the library, and he saw the library do what the library did, Learn it, copy it, teach it. And within the hour her blood was full of the answer. A defense that had not existed a day ago, purpose-built, against the plague that had beaten 400 years, and the gray water in her began, cell by cell, to turn bright again. Ren Callas had outsuffered the worst thing the conquered fleet had ever made. She had walked an edge no instrument could measure for 3 days, and she had come back, and she had brought the cure back with her, carried it out of the fire in her own bright blood, and she had done it while unconscious, while burning, while alone in the dark that she was never, this time, alone in. Ilan Vareth put his face down against the edge of the couch, next to the girl's hot hand, and for the first time in his 400 gentle years, the physician wept, because he had been a scholar of fragility his whole life, and he had just watched the least fragile thing in the universe do the bravest, and he did not have a word for it, in any language his device could carry. So he made the sound his people made in the presence of a courage they had not expected and did not know where to put. The sound he had made on the first day, in a round, warm room, and this time he let it be as loud as it wanted. They had one chance, and they took it while the girl still burned. The harvest lines were ready, because the prime physician had made them ready, because Ilan had sent word through Corral, and Othmala had spent 3 days doing the thing she was best at, being the calmest person in a fleet that had forgotten how to be calm. The moment Ilan's word came, she has it. The answer is in her blood now, before it changes. The fleet moved with a speed it had not used in 400 years. They drew from Ren what she had told them on the first day they could always take. Not much, her body needed most of it, but enough. Enough to seed the fleet's own bioforges. Enough for the physicians to do the one thing they were still the best in the arm at doing, which was to take a true and living answer and make more of it, fast, at scale, and push it out through the harvest lines into 9,000 failing bodies before the silt could finish its curve. It was not the girl's blood itself that cured them in the end. Ilan had been right on the 4th night. The answer would not survive being a substance. But the answer showed the fleet's forges the shape of the thing, the folded molecule that jammed the plague, and the forges, guided by that shape, built a medicine the Sethari way, copied, stabilized, mass-produced, a treatment that a fleet full of the fragile could receive and survive. Ren's body had found the door. The fleet, once shown the door, remembered how to hold it open. The curve bent at the 17th hour after the fever broke. It was the first time in the history of the outbreak that the machines, in their calm and terrible way, drew a line that turned back toward the living. By the end of the cycle, the new deaths had stopped. By the next, the sickest were rising. The silt, the thing the fleet had sealed in its deepest vault and made its peace with never beating, was beaten, in the recycled air of 12 white ships, by a medicine grown from an answer. A 14-year-old girl had carried out of a 3-day fire in her own bright blood. The final count was 240 dead. It was a wound the fleet would carry for a long time. But the fleet had 8,760 living who, by every projection the machines had drawn, should have been dead, and the fleet knew exactly why they were not. Ren woke on the 5th day. She woke the way she always woke, without moving, taking stock first, counting her heartbeat and her breath and her fingers before she spent the energy of her eyes. Then she remembered that she did not have to count anymore, that she was warm, that she was safe, and she opened her eyes and found Ilan Vareth kneeling by the couch where he had knelt for 3 days and had barely left since, his pale skin gone gray with exhaustion, his 4 eyes fixed on her the way they had been fixed on her from the first, with an attention so complete it was almost unbearable, except that she understood it now. Did it work? She said. Her voice was a ruin. She did not care. It was the only question. It worked, Ilan said. Ren, it worked. They are alive. 8,760 of them are alive, and they are alive because of you, and the fleet knows it. The whole fleet knows it. His voice broke on the last of it. You did what my people could not do in 400 years. You did it in 3 days. You did it burning in the dark, and you brought the answer back, and I have no word for what you are in any language, so I have stopped looking for one. You are Ren Callas. That will have to be the word." She lay and looked at him for a while. Then she did the thing that would stay with him longest of all, longer than the scoured panel, longer than the fever, longer than the 3 days. She did not ask about herself. She did not ask what would happen to her, or whether they were still afraid of her, or what her blood would be worth now, or any of the things a resource asks. She asked the thing a person asks. "Anybody else make it?" Ren said. "The ones who were sick. Did any of the ones you thought were gone? Did any of them come back?" And Ilan understood that she had circled all the way back to the first question she had ever asked him in the round, warm room on the first day. Was there anybody else alive? He had answered no then, and it had been the hardest truth he had ever given. This time the answer was different, and he found he had to steady himself to give it, because a yes could break a person as surely as a no. "Yes," he said. "Some of the ones we thought were gone came back, because of what you did, Ren. Some of them came back." Ren Callas closed her eyes, and this time in the warm and the safe, with water enough at last to spare, she let herself cry, and Ilan Vareth stayed, small and close and present, and did not leave because he had promised, and because there was nowhere in the reach of any chart he would rather have been. The fleet did not know what to do with her at first. That was honest, and Mala was honest about it when she came, at last, to the sealed suite, folding her ancient moon-gray limbs to sit by the girl who had saved her fleet. They had brought aboard a thing they feared, and it had turned out to be a child, and the child had turned out to be the strongest thing they had ever met, and had used that strength for nothing but to give her life to strangers who had guarded her door. Corral came too, and he did not speak of containment. He knelt, which his people did not do lightly, and he said, in his flat voice gone rough, that he had called her a weapon shaped like a girl, and that he had been wrong, that she was a girl, only a girl, and that he would spend the rest of his service making sure the fleet never forgot the difference. Ren, who did not hold grudges because grudges cost energy, and she had spent 60 days learning what energy was worth, told him it was all right, that she'd have been scared of her blood too. They asked her in time what she wanted. The fleet owed her a debt it could not name, and it offered her everything it had. A place among them, a world if she wanted one, the care of the finest medicine in the arm for the rest of her life. And Ren thought about it because she thought about things now before she said them, and then she told them what she wanted, and it was not a world and it was not to be cared for. "There are more of us out there," she said. "Humans. My ship wasn't the only one that went out. There's colonies, there's other transports. Some of them made it and some of them didn't, and some of them are out there right now in the dark not knowing if anybody's coming." She looked at Ilan and at Mala and at the whole gentle, terrified, grateful fleet through the round viewport. "You go to the wounded worlds. That's what you do. You said nobody has to be hard, that it's not a good thing to have to grow up hard." Her jaw did the thing, the single crack, but there was the lit thing behind it now, and it did not go out. "So go find the ones who had to, and get to them before they have to promise their kids not to open the door. That's what I want." That's the whole of it. The conquered medical fleet had drifted for 400 years between the wounded worlds, unhurried, healing what it could and burying what it could not, welcome everywhere because it frightened no one. It went out differently after Ren Callas. It went out faster. It went out toward the hard places, the Deathworlds and the failing ships and the colonies clinging to worlds that wanted them dead, the places it had once passed by because the peoples there were too fierce, too strange, too hard to understand. It went to them now, and at the front of every survey in the small fast picket ships went the fleet's newest and strangest physician in training, a human girl with resurrected fingers and a silver-scarred palm, who could read the faces of the doomed and tell them, in the language her mother had left her, that this time someone had come, that this time they would not be in the dark alone. The scientists of that fleet had tested a girl's blood once, expecting fragility, expecting a candle in the wind. What they found had terrified them. A body that burned hotter than they could survive and banked colder than they could endure, that took strangers apart in 6 minutes and remembered them forever, that raised dead flesh and rewrote its own instructions, and outsuffered over 3 days, the worst thing 400 years of medicine had ever sealed away. They had been right to be terrified. But they had learned from a 14-year-old girl in a round, warm room, the thing the fear had hidden from them, the truth that outlasted every result on every panel, that the most frightening thing in the universe is also when it kneels to be small for you, when it holds out its scarred hand and says take whatever you need, it grows back, the most merciful. That the hardest thing that ever lived had spent that hardness, every terrible ounce of it, on the softest thing there is. And that when a fleet of the gentle finally met a child that could not be killed, she did not teach them to be afraid. She taught them to go looking for the others, and to hurry.